Yes.
Good.
All right. Very good. Oh, we're recording. Excellent. Well, nice to see you all. Let's begin with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for all the gifts and blessings that you give to us. We thank you for the gift of this snow, that it may benefit the fields and the crops this coming spring. We ask that you keep us all safe, even as we journey about or as we stay at home. Keep us warm and safe during this inclement weather. And help us always to remember the great blessing we have from you, the love that you give to us, your love for life, and that you have blessed us with our own lives, each of us. We pray also that we would grow in our knowledge of that creation of life, that even as there may be those who would dispute that, we may have more confidence and knowledge and understanding in the truth of your creation. Bless our time today. Help us all to grow stronger in that faith. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I'm going to close this door. Hang on just a second. All right. It's nice to see you all and see you all online as well, so that's good. We are going to spend this week and next week, the next two sessions, we're going to be talking about evolution and creation. So it's chapters 3 and 4 in the book. If you didn't read the book, it's okay. We're going to skim through it like usual. But if you did read the book, you'll notice that he doesn't really explain evolution. Pastor All is in there. Now, I don't know that he needs to. Most people understand what the ideas behind evolution are. But just briefly, I'm going to explain
Is it a long church service?
from an evolution standpoint.
In the meeting.
You were here for the end of the church service.
I know. But then
Russell, you can mute yourself.
15 minutes, maybe.
okay, so it went to about 9:15.
Yeah, that's Mark and Becky. Yeah.
You're muted now.
All right, so before we get started with chapter 3, pull out the handouts. I have 3 handouts here for us. I know a few of you at home picked them up in advance. If you didn't pick them up in advance, I have extra copies. They'll be here on the front counter for a while. You don't really need them. I'll kind of show you a little bit of what we're going through on these handouts. I want to start with the handout that says this, Theory of Evolution. Looks like this, Theory of Evolution in a nutshell, okay? This is right from an evolution website. I've got the tagline on there of the website right at the top, the Theory of Evolution in a nutshell. First, genome mutations constantly occur. There are always mutations. Yeah, that's true. We would agree. These mutations can be passed to offspring. Again, that's true. We would agree. Yes, mutations can be passed to offspring. Third down there, individuals with particular mutations may survive and reproduce more than others. Therefore, the population evolves. Well, now's where we might start getting a little bit skeptical of what they're saying, because yes, mutations do survive and reproduce, but it doesn't necessarily mean a change or a population change. So that's an issue there. And then the fourth part down there, over time, this process, the buildup of mutations, can result in populations that specialize for particular ecological niches and may eventually result in the emergence of new species. That's a huge leap of logic, if you ask me, and many others.
How many billions of years should that take?
Yeah, how many billions of years does that take? Right, exactly. So, pardon?
Can't be more than 7,000 years.
Yeah, right. Can't be more than 7,000. Yeah, right. So, in a nutshell, this is what evolutionists say evolution is. Okay. Right below that, I found this online also. Darwin's 5 points. I don't remember where I found it, so I don't have a reference there of the website. So I apologize for that. Darwin's 5 points. 1, population has variations. 2, some variations are favorable. 3, more offspring are produced than survive. 4, those that survive have favorable traits. 5, a population will change over time. Now, the first few of those, populations have variations. Yeah, we'd agree. Some variations are favorable. Maybe a few. The vast majority of variations and mutations are unfavorable. 3, more offspring are produced than survive. That certainly is true. Those that survive have favorable traits. Again, that's not necessarily true. There is a leap of logic on the part of evolutionists that if you survive, you have more favorable traits. That's not necessarily true. And then number 5 there on that point, a population will change over time. Again, a huge leap of faith. We're going to be talking about this as we get into chapter 3. Most of this week is going to be discussing some of the holes and fallacies of evolution. And then next week, we're going to talk a little bit more in chapter 4 about the support for creation, scientific evidence that supports creation, okay? Flip the page on this first handout. It says, evolution frequently asked questions. 5 proofs of evolution. So again, I got this from a evolutionist website. I do have the tagline on there, so you can see where I got it. evolutionfaq.com articles. So this is what an evolutionist would say are 5 proofs, things that prove evolution. Number 1, the universal genetic code. All cells on Earth have a similar DNA structure. Well, that doesn't mean we're all the same. You know, animals are not the same as plants, for instance. So the fact that there is a universal genetic code does not mean that we all come from the exact same source. 2, the fossil record. They would say the fossil record shows that the simplest fossils are found in the oldest rocks, and the more complex fossils are found in the newest rocks, the highest rocks in the layers. And therefore, the fossil record proves evolution. Well, there's some huge problems with that. There's something, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit in the chapter, called a missing link. There are huge gaps in the fossil record, huge. So the fossil record really does not prove evolution, but they would claim it does. 3, genetic commonalities. Human beings have approximately 96% of genes in common with chimpanzees, 90% in common with cats, 80% with cows, 75% with mice. Did you realize you're 80% the same as a cow? Well, again, that's a huge leap because when it comes to DNA, you can change one gene and it completely changes your structure, who you are, what type of being you are, everything about you. So the fact that we're 80% the same as cows in terms of our DNA structure, that's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because that 20% is huge. That's huge. So again, this is used by evolutionists as a proof for evolution, but it's not. Number 4, common traits in embryos. They will show you like ultrasounds of an embryo of a cow and a pig and a horse and a fish and a human, and they'll say, look, they're all the same. Well, yeah, at 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever, yeah, they're all going to look the same because they're all just a blob at that point. This, again, it's a huge leap of faith to say, oh, all embryos look the same, but they aren't the same. They have a different DNA structure. So it's a false argument here. Number 5, bacterial resistance to antibiotics. So it'll say bacteria, which are a living organism, they become resistant to a certain strain of antibiotics. You guys know about that, right? Once a new antibiotic comes out, doctors prescribe it. Once it gets out there in the population, and maybe too much so, then the bacteria becomes resistant to it. The same thing happens with bugs and farmers. They'll use a pesticide, and over time, the bugs become resistant to the pesticide. So what do the farmers need to do? They need to change pesticides. Doctors need to rotate or change antibiotics. So evolutionists will say, well, see right there, that's evolution in action. Those organisms are changing. Well, there's a difference. Those organisms aren't becoming a new organism. They're simply adapting. That's the word I would use. Adaptation, not evolution. Okay? So this is a claim by evolutionists to say, here's 5 proofs of evolution. They're not proofs of evolution. In fact, they're even very weak arguments to begin with. All right, let's get into the book. Life's Big Questions, God's Big Answers, Chapter 3. We're going to skim through this. I'm going to go somewhat quickly. If you have questions, please stop and ask, or comments, please comment. Page 21, the first page of Chapter 3. The bottom paragraph there. While the same poll showed 30% of Americans believe God used evolution to create the universe. So there's a huge chunk of people that try to merge together creation and evolution. Okay? We're going to talk about this particular point more next week. But there's a lot of people who say, well, science has proven evolution, so science must be true, but I'm still a Christian. I still believe in God and the Bible. So how did this happen? Well, God must have used evolution in the process of creation. Well, there's some huge problems with that, theological problems and scientific problems. I'm going to address that more next week. So there, I'm salting your attention a little bit for next week, okay? And Pastor Allis addresses it next week in chapter 4 as well. So turn the page, and then we're on page 22. Every worldview starts with an assumption, and then down in the middle of that paragraph, evolutionists assume there is only a natural realm with no supernatural realm. A simple question to ask is, how do you know this is true? You've heard me say before, kind of the 2-year-old question. Well, why? Well, why? Well, why that? Well, why that? Well, we ask evolutionists, where did that come from? Well, where did that come from? Well, where did that come from? They start with an assumption, even though they claim not to. Their assumption is there is no supernatural realm. Only the natural realm, what you can see. That's their assumption. Well, can they prove that? They're going to turn around and say, can you prove God exists? And my answer would be, well, actually, I can. I have a couple of proofs, evidence that God exists. If you choose to accept them or believe them, they generally reject those evidences for God. We're going to get into those in the coming weeks. But then I turn around and say, can you prove God doesn't exist? Well, no, I don't have to prove God doesn't exist. I can't see him, so he doesn't exist. Well, just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist, of course, right? All right. So you can see in the second to last paragraph there on 22, if you concede the point that matter making up the whole universe was always there, another question to ask would be, where did it come from? See, that's my point that I've made a few times. Where did it come from? We can keep asking that. All right, now we're going to get into some of the problems, scientific problems with evolution. There should be like 4 big ones here. There's a lot more than this. But in the book, Pastor Allis, he focuses on these 4 big ones. Number 1, questions for the Big Bang Theory, page 23. Big Bang Theory. That was a pretty good show, wasn't it? I liked it. It was funny. A bunch of nerds sitting around doing nerdy stuff and having a good time. It was a good TV show. All right. So the first huge scientific problem with evolution, right in the middle of that opening paragraph there, a question to ask regarding the Big Bang would be, what about the second law of thermodynamics? This law, not a theory, states that things in our universe go from a state of order to disorder, not from a state of disorder to order, unless acted upon by some outside intelligent force. First of all, let me point out there's such a thing as scientific laws and scientific theories. Now, if you remember from a science class, maybe in high school, what's the difference? A law has been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt by multiple experiments, by multiple scientists throughout history. A scientific law is proven fact, like the law of gravity. That's a scientific law, the law of gravity. Theories are not proven. Coincidentally, just a side note, when evolutionists talk about theory, what do they usually use in terms of words? They usually say evolution. They neglect to say the theory of evolution. Evolution's never been proven, never will be, because it's not true. But it's only a theory. Well, there are many scientific laws, and if you remember from, again, maybe a high school science class or something, there are 3 laws of thermodynamics. I remembered them, actually, stretching back. I looked them up, though, to make sure that I could remember them. 3 laws of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics is that heat always goes from a hot source to a cold source. It always flows in that direction. That is because the state of matter, the state of the universe, always goes from a state of order to a state of disorder. Can something go from disorder or chaos to a state of being structured and ordered unless something acts upon it. It cannot, right? This is the argument, the counter argument to evolutionists. You take a whole bunch of watch parts that are in a state of disorder, a state of being disassembled, you put them in the box, and you shake the box, and you shake the box, and you shake the box for, what do they claim, 3 billion years? And then you open the box, and inside is a working watch. It put itself together. That's an illustration of what evolutionists believe.
That's what I should have done with my snowblower.
Yeah. Is your snowblower not working?
It's gonna get fixed.
Okay, all right. Yeah, right.
And for a billion years.
A big box, right? So it's frankly, it's kind of common sense, but it is a scientific law that things go from order to disorder, not disorder to order. And yet the whole idea of the Big Bang Theory is that things went from disorder or chaos to a state of order and structure all by themselves. It completely contradicts a known scientific law. Yet evolutionists brush over that. They ignore it. They don't address it. So that's a huge problem. It doesn't fit the facts. All right, so if you turn the page to page 24, down on the bottom there, there's that little highlight smudge there that they do in this book. An explosion couldn't bring about order due to the second law of thermodynamics. Okay, that's actually a huge problem that evolutionists can't explain. So you could write a number 1 there. That's one huge big scientific critique problem for evolution. Number 2, let's do another one. Page 25, life's evolution. Right in the middle of that opening paragraph there on page 25, from spontaneous generation, the theory that life came from lifeless matter. Life cannot come from lifeless matter due to the law of biogenesis, which states that life comes only from living things. There's a law in biology, a number of them. One of them in biology is the law of biogenesis, which means living matter can only come from living matter. Now, even if we're not scientists, none of us really are, I think, that's common sense. Living matter only comes from living matter. And yet, that's what evolutionists claim, that life sprang out of inert, unliving matter. Some bowl of chemical soup somewhere, none of which is alive, and all of a sudden out of that, there's some spark of life. That is still an unsolved question in the theory of evolution, is where did the first spark of life come from? They can't explain it. Well, for good reason. Because there's a scientific law. Life only comes from other life, right? All right. So on the bottom of page 25, life could not have come from lifeless matter according to the law of biogenesis, right? Number 2 there. That's a number 2 big reason, scientific problem with evolution. Okay, turn the page, page 26. Now there's questions about mutations. And on the top of page 27, the first paragraph, furthermore, the mutations observed in science are almost always harmful to the organism and are actually a loss of genetic information. Did you realize that? Mutations are a loss of genetic information. And he's right here in writing this, that mutations are almost always harmful. Harmful, not beneficial. Now that word almost is in there, isn't it? So that gives evolutionists a little bit of out. They're going to say, well, out of 1,000 mutations, 999 of them may be harmful to the organism, and therefore the organism dies out anyway. The mutation isn't preserved, but that 1 out of 1,000, or whatever the number might be, is actually beneficial to the organism, and that's the one that survives, and then that mutation is preserved. That's how their logic is going to go. Well, I don't know how to respond to that particular critique there. Mutations are almost always harmful, and they will try to catch you with a gotcha, because they're almost always harmful, meaning occasionally they are beneficial. However, it is true that mutations are a loss of genetic information. So how can you come to some feature on an organism that a reptile is turning into a bird and it has to gain a beak. So all of a sudden you need to add genetic information in order to have some sort of mutation that produces a beak in order for a reptile to evolve into a bird. And yet mutations are a loss of genetic information, not a gain or a creation of genetic information. See, there's a problem. Mutations have never led to a new life form. That's the smudge there on the top, page 27. I wrote a number 3 next to that. Mutations have never been shown to lead to a new life form. They are always a loss of genetic information. That is 100% true, always. And then they are almost always harmful to the organism itself, okay? So that's a big problem that evolutionists have a little difficulty discovering, answering. Now, I want to take a slight side trip before we finish the chapter. We got, 1 page to go. On the bottom of page 27, the second last paragraph there. However, to show evolution is true, evidence is presented that reveals that mutations occur. For example, insects become resistant to certain pesticides. Since these bugs are bug spray proof, this proves evolution. Not so fast. This is an example of microevolution, not macroevolution. So we get into a little bit of wordsmithing here. Word pretzels. So I got to untangle this for you and make sure you understand correctly. Because when evolutionists use the word evolution, they refer to both macroevolution and microevolution. Macroevolution means one type of creature becomes another type of creature. A reptile becomes a bird. That's macroevolution. Microevolution is any particular creature having new features, like a new color, or a different type of fur,
Or lots of features.
or a loss of features, right? Or different colors of feathers. And there's a huge difference between microevolution and macroevolution. When I'm discussing these types of things with youth or other people, I prefer to use the word adaptation instead of microevolution. But I did have a Christian one time come to me and say, well, Pastor, we do believe in microevolution. He was actually kind of poking at me a little bit to test me. And I said, you're right. We do believe in microevolution, but not macroevolution. Now, let me give you a common example that is often cited by evolutionists. Back in time, I don't know, a century or so ago, Industrial Revolution, there was a colony of moths living at the edge of London. And they were light colored, so they could blend in and not get eaten by birds. Nearby to them was built a factory, which started spewing smoke. And over the course of 1 or 2 generations, it was observable, and it happened fairly quickly, the moths changed their inherent color and became a darker color, a dark gray type of color. So evolutionists say, see, there's evolution. They need to put the word micro in front of there. Did the moth become another creature? No, it simply changed its color. That's called adaptation. And we agree with that as creationists, as Christians, we would agree with that. You change your color. It's the same reason there's different breeds of dogs. Are they all dogs? Yes. But if you have some dogs after they came off the ark, there's some of the dogs migrated north to Scandinavia. And the dogs that had short fur, what would happen to them? They would freeze to death. So the only dogs that survived were dogs with long fur. Huskies or whatever. And so they would keep mixing and breeding with themselves, those same long-furred dogs, and they became a breed. They had different traits. They had long fur, but that's it. They're still a dog. Other dogs migrated south into Africa. And what happened to the dogs down there that had long fur? They died, dehydrated, overheated, whatever, they died. So the dogs with short fur survived. Became Chihuahuas or whatever, and then swam across the ocean to Mexicans. So the Mexican Chihuahuas, right? So that's an example of how dogs adapted to their environment, but they didn't change. It wasn't macroevolution. They didn't have a dog became a horse, became an elephant, became a whatever. They just changed their outward appearance, but their DNA was still dog DNA. You see the difference? So there's a huge difference between macroevolution and microevolution, and evolution supporters will purposely confuse the two, conflate the two, because they want you to think that microevolution proves macroevolution, but it does not. That's why I use the term adaptation. But simply things adapting. Bugs adapt to the pesticide, so you need a new pesticide. Dogs adapt to their environment, and that causes them to become a breed. Moths adapted to their environment and changed their color. That's all it is. All right, so then our last page, page 28, there are no transitional fossils of one organism changing into another. So that's number 4. I would say that's number 4, huge scientific critique, scientific-based critique of the theory of evolution. This is actually the fossil record. They try to claim the fossil record supports and proves evolution. We would say the opposite. The fossil record disproves evolution. Because, and I'm just broadly speaking, if you say a fish turned into a reptile turned into a bird, then at some point, you're going to have a creature that is a fish and had a few mutations, and so now it's got a few reptile features, although it's still a fish. And then that fish had further mutations in the next generation that made it a reptile. And it lost the features of a fish, right? So those are called transitional fossils, that you're going to have a fossil that's part fish, part reptile, and some other fossil somewhere that's part reptile and part bird. It would have some features of the new creature that it's evolving into, while still having some features of the old creature that it's evolving out of. Understand? Not a single one of those fossils has ever been found. They often kind of term it the missing link. Well, we can't find the missing link. And then all of a sudden they'll say, oh, we found the missing link, and we found this skull that is half ape, half human. That happened, right? Neolithic man, and I don't know, it was a couple decades ago, it seems like. And then it was a big splash in the news media, the scientific news. And then all of a sudden, a year later, they did further tests on the skull, and they find out, no, it was actually 100% human, but it was a human who had been deformed due to malnutrition. So he had like this sloping forehead and kind of this jaw shape, and it looked like a caveman, as we would say, but it was really 100% human who just didn't have the right nutrition and vitamins and was deformed. That's all. Does that happen? Yeah. Human beings are sometimes born deformed, right? So, but of course, there was never a retraction made that, oh, that Neolithic man, that's the missing link between ape and humans. They never retracted that story. They left it hanging out there to make you think that it still existed. All right, so that's kind of a summary of chapter 3 with some big scientific holes in evolution. Let me pause to drink some coffee and see if there's any comments or questions, or even online as well, if any of you online have some questions or comments.
One of the things on the very first thing that we covered in theory of, in a nutshell, it says individuals with particular mutations. They use a word called may there, and that also means may not, or
Yeah.
it can or it could, but it doesn't mean that it did.
Right, right. Sure, we can use their own language against them on this theory of evolution nutshell where it says individuals with particular mutations may survive. That also means they may not. Right, exactly. It's a big question mark in there. That's true. Right. Any other questions or thoughts on anything? All right. Last thing I want to do then is go over these other two handouts. The first one that says evolution news on top, and I'm looking at the bigger side that says, what are the top 10 problems with Darwinian evolution? Okay. Now, I'm sorry for how small it's printed. I wanted to get it on one page so I could make this a one-page handout. I'm not going to read through this, but you can go to Evolution News and go to their articles and look up this author, Casey Luskin, and you can find this if you want. All I'm doing is trying to point out to you that there's a lot of scientific cited evidence that Darwinian evolution cannot explain. Okay. This author, Casey Luskin, I've never heard of him, but he's apparently a PhD in geology and also a lawyer. So I guess that's a good thing for arguing. They're good at arguing, right? This website, Evolution News, I believe, as near as I can tell, just looking around at it, I think is a website that is published by people who are called intelligent design proponents. Let me explain that a little bit, just a slight sidebar here. There are many scientists who recognize there are holes in evolution. Some of them are Christian, some of them are not Christian. They recognize there are holes in evolution and that evolution cannot explain many, many scientific issues. And so they say, well, it's clear, especially if you think about the second law of thermodynamics, that some outside intelligent force was involved when our universe was created. Intelligent design. Now, those who are not Christian that believe this idea, this scientific idea of intelligent design will say, we don't know what that outside force is. We're not really sure. We're not getting into theology or religion or myth or aliens or anything else. We recognize that in the scientific world, there appears to be something intelligent that's been behind the design of the universe. Okay? As Christians, we would say, we agree with you. And if you're a Christian scientist who's part of one of these intelligent design groups that advocate for this, you'd say, you do like Paul did on the Acropolis. Say, yes, you're right, I agree with you. There is an intelligent design behind the creation of the universe. Now let me tell you who that is. It's God the Father, right? So then we can further that discussion in that way, but that would be kind of outside of the scientific realm. So as a Christian scientist, I think would absolutely agree with the philosophy of intelligent design within the scientific community as a step in the right direction. It is, okay? This website is that type of thing. Evolution News. Let me just read the top one on this first page here. Number one, and just to give you a flavor that this is not myth or made up or fantasy. Number one, lack of viable mechanism for producing high levels of complex and specified information. Related to this are problems with the Darwinian mechanism producing irreducibly complex features and the problems of non-functional or deleterious intermediate stages. If you read that slowly, you can kind of understand it, but frankly, you don't need to. My point is, there is significant scientific evidence that causes problems for Darwinian evolution. Okay, this is very technical, but you can read through this. If you're having a discussion with some relative or friend or neighbor who's, scientific minded, you could say, hey, take a look at this. What do you think? Also, another quick sidebar. He mentions in here irreducibly complex features. That is another problem with evolution. If we were making a list, that could be number 5 on our list in the book. Irreducibly complex features. That is a feature that needs to have a whole bunch of things in place for it to properly function. And if any one of them is missing, it would not function. And the example often used by people who are creationists like us would be the eyeball. At some point, according to evolutionists, the eyeball came into existence. You went from creatures that had no eyes, worms and protozoa and amoeba, these things, they didn't have eyes. And all of a sudden, out of that came other creatures, and then came fish. And fish had eyes. And then birds have eyes. And then animals have eyes. And humans have eyes. So at some point, the eye must have evolved, right? That's what an evolutionist would say. However, there are dozens of components of the eyeball that if any one of them is missing, the eye will not function. So in order to believe in the evolution of the eyeball, you have to believe that a dozen different mutations all took place simultaneously in the same creature, in the same generation of that creature, and all survived at the exact same time for that eye to evolve.
And they continue to survive.
And they continue to survive, exactly.
They don't change.
Right.
And we're not seeing mutations.
Right, we're not seeing further mutations in the eye, right. So this is one of those irreducibly complex features in biology that mathematically, probability, it wouldn't happen. You can't have all of this happen all the time. You know, well, there was one reptile that had a couple of mutations that was on the path to leading an eye, and then the next generation of that creature, there was a few more mutations, and then the eyeball developed. That wouldn't happen because the eye is irreducibly complex. Okay?
This is why I don't like science.
You were an English teacher, right?
Yes. Your head just goes like this when they start saying all this stuff, and then eventually it just gets thrown.
Yeah. It can get rather complicated, and especially in the modern era, you get all wrapped up in certain word usage. Yeah. So see, there's English. Is English changing too? Yeah, English is evolving, right?
Only the names of what they call things.
All right.
No more nouns.
No more nouns. We're going to do away with nouns. We're going to evolve them out of the language. Yeah. All right. Let's look at the other side of this. Evolution news on the other side. What are the top 3 flaws in Darwinian evolution as taught today in public schools? This is very understandable for us. It's not very technical. It's written by the same author. Number 1, tell students that the fossil record often lacks transitional forms and that there are explosions of new life forms, a pattern of radiations that challenges Darwinian evolutionary theory. See, when evolution is taught in schools today, it is not explained that the fossil record actually lacks any, not even one, transitional form from one creature to another. That's not explained. That's a huge problem, number 1 right there. Number 2, tell students that many scientists have challenged the ability of random mutation and natural selection to produce complex biological features. I've run into this one a lot back in my days in college too. Well, all scientists recognize that evolution is true. And if you want to follow science, you need to recognize that also. All scientists, it's a bullying technique, a verbal bullying technique. All scientists. Well, I was Christian. I'm not believing that. I wasn't going into one of the specific hard sciences, but architecture is kind of scientific. So I didn't believe it. And when you look at it, there are a lot of scientists who reject evolution, both Christian and non-Christian. Okay? So here is interesting in this little, if you were to go to this website and look up this article, you look on your handout there. See how it says, tell students that many scientists, see where it says many scientists? It's a different color. On the live website, that's a hyperlink. I clicked on it. It took me to a petition that was signed by scientists that stated, it had a one item on the petition. It was something like, we recognize that evolution has many flaws and does not explain the scientific evidence that we see. It was something like that. Fairly generic, but specific, that we recognize there's problems or reject evolution. And then there were something like 25 pages with 45 signatures per page. I counted them. And every single one of them was a PhD in a hard science at an American university somewhere. Okay? PhDs in chemistry, physics, biology, geology, astronomy, all these kinds of things. And they're all putting their name on this. There are lots of scientists who reject evolution. And actually, I give those scientists courage. I give them credit because of the courage. By putting their name on that petition, they're harming their own reputation in terms of working with their fellow peers in the scientific world, because they will be denigrated because of that. So they are harming their reputations by publicly proclaiming, we disagree with evolution. Okay?
Lose their Twitter account.
And it could lose their Twitter account. Yes, right. They could get canceled. And some of them do. They have trouble. They have academic trouble in their own fields because they come out and against evolution. But here's a hyperlink of a whole bunch of those scientists. So again, that's a fallacy. It's a bullying technique. Well, everyone believes, all scientists believe. Well, no, they don't. Number 3, tell students that many lines of evidence for Darwinian evolution and common descent are weak. Vertebrate embryos start out developing very differently in contrast with the drawings of embryos often found in textbooks. They'll show you all these embryos. Oh, they look all the same. Actually, they're quite different. There's little tiny features that are different, and they have different DNA. Makes them hugely different. DNA evidence conflicting pictures of the tree of life. There is no such single tree. So when you look at all of the evidence, there isn't like, oh, this little gradual change in this tree where one feature became another. There's all of a sudden an explosion. In the fossil record and in the genetic record, there's an explosion. Well, yeah, there's an explosion. When did that happen? When God created. Yeah, exactly. But the evidence does not support this idea of a tree of life. And the third part, 3C there, evidence of small-scale changes such as the modest changes in the size of finch beaks or slight changes in color frequencies of the wings of peppered moths shows microevolution, not macroevolution. I already explained to you the example of the peppered moths that's in London in the Industrial Revolution. That's one of the common ones cited. Another example cited is finch beaks, how they changed their size and shape because of the food available to the finches. But that's microevolution, not macroevolution. It's what we should better term adaptation. But when evolution is taught, here's what his point is in this article, they conflate or purposely don't explain the difference between microevolution and macroevolution. Okay. All right, any questions? Comments? All right. The last handout, then we'll kind of sum it up after that. It says why 1/3 of biologists now question Darwinism. I came across this article, and you've heard me mention that there's a growing number of scientists out there who are rejecting evolution and looking for a different theory as to the origins of the universe.
Well, give them the Bible and be done with it.
Give them the Bible, right? No, see, the problem is that certainly there are Christian scientists who would absolutely, they say, yes, we agree with intelligent design. In fact, we will go beyond intelligent design and say we know who that intelligent designer is. Christian scientists, absolutely out there. But the non-Christian scientists, there's a growing number of them who say evolution isn't right. It doesn't fit the evidence. So, but because they start with the assumption, being non-Christian or non-religious, they start with the assumption the supernatural realm doesn't exist. So therefore, they're looking for a new theory. Unfortunately, they're looking in the wrong places because we already know what the correct origin of the universe is. Well, this is an article that points to that. And this comes from, I've got the tagline on the bottom. It comes from thefederalist.com. So you can look it up if you want, or link to it, or send it to somebody if you like. 1/3 of biologists now question Darwinism. I'm not going to read the whole article, but if you turn to page 3, I'm going to read one paragraph in here that's interesting. Kind of the third paragraph down on page 3. In the past decade, the works of Professor Michael Behe, Stephen Meyer, and others have given more life to the debate on the national stage. In Darwin Devolves, Behe points to the process of mutations to describe the inadequacy of unguided materialist process to add information. Meyer explores the Cambrian explosion and the complexity of the cell to show the biodiversity and complexity we observe, and notes that natural processes have never been observed to produce such results. Okay? Now, I've seen these names come up a few times in readings and articles, Michael Behe and Stephen Meyer, and above it, you can see also in the paragraph right above it, Stephen J. Gould and Michael Denton. Those are a couple of others. So I looked these names up. These 4 scientists especially, and there's more than that, they started out as evolutionists. They believed evolution, they promoted evolution. One of them, Denton, you see in the paragraph right above it, he calls himself an agnostic. Now remember from last week, our worldviews, what is an agnostic? An agnostic is someone who says, I don't know if God exists or not. It's an unknown question in my mind. God may or may not exist, but even if he does, he's irrelevant and doesn't matter. He's off in the corner there doing his own thing. That's an agnostic. So that's Denton. He was an evolutionist and an agnostic. And all 4 of these ended up rejecting the evolutionary theory and becoming what we would call intelligent design proponents. Again, I would give these scientists credit for courage because they've been writing books. Evolution, A Theory in Crisis, Darwin Devolves. They're critical of the theory of evolution and believe there needs to be some other issue. Now, yes, as Christians, we could pray for them and say, we hope you get beyond intelligent design into understanding what really is the origin of the universe. But at least it's a step in the right direction, right? Intelligent design, we can sort of agree with them on that. And so that's a good thing. So here are some very popular names of evolutionists who changed because the evidence didn't support it. And the conclusion of this whole article, if you read the whole thing, if you were to read it, at the very end, he talks about, or somewhere in there, he talks about there is a growing number. It's approximately, he's estimating, or based on his own information, 1/3 of biologists now say Darwinism, evolution, is not valid. That's huge. That's huge. So don't be bullied into saying, well, all scientists recognize evolution is true. No, they don't, and it's not. All right, pause for questions. Any questions? I know that was some pretty fast-paced lecture there. So I apologize a little bit for that. I wanted to get it all in an hour. We still got about 10 minutes. So a little bit of time for questions. I know in some of the other classes, some questions that came up, one of the questions was about dinosaurs in evolution. We have a whole chapter we're going to deal with dinosaurs, okay? Yes, dinosaurs existed. We as Christians would believe in that. We believe in dinosaurs. They're actually in the Bible. They were on the ark. But what would have happened? They died out. They went extinct. So we're going to talk for a whole class just about dinosaurs. It's one of the later chapters in here, chapter 9. So that is related to evolution, though, certainly, dinosaurs. Yeah.
My understanding was Darwin himself never really bought fully into that whole theory. I mean, he just proposed it, and other guys took it and ran with it.
I think you're right. I'm not a biographer of Darwin, but I seem to recall reading somewhere that he came up with the idea of mutations in creatures bringing about change. And someone else took that, some other else's took that idea and kind of expanded it or fleshed it out into the theory of evolution.
Yeah, right.
So really what Darwin says is that mutation brings about change, which honestly it is the core idea behind evolution. So it does relate to that, but yeah, you're right. Others further kind of refined Darwin's ideas to come up with the theory of evolution. Yeah, that's my understanding. All right, other questions or comments? I browbeat you all into silence.
Well, the only comment I have to say, question was on that page 3, on the third paragraph from the bottom, where it says Paul Nelson, Goldstein, and then on a one-on-one at a scientific meeting after the third or fourth beer.
Yeah.
I think that we should do that in our Bible class.
Yes, I agree, right? We do our best thinking after 3 or 4 beers, right? Right. All right. Yeah, it's a good article. Feel free to read it, the whole thing, or not, doesn't matter. But the whole point of this class is to make you aware that there are a lot of scientific problems and flaws with the theory of evolution. And that helps to give us more confidence that what God tells us is true. God is a God of truth. He never lies, including what he told us in the first book of the Bible, in Genesis, chapters 1 through 11. It's all true. There's been no evidence against it. And we're going to get a little bit more of that next week when we talk about scientific evidences in favor of or supporting the idea of creation. And let me put in a little plug for the Creation Museum too. I know there are a number of you who haven't been and are interested in going. We've taken the youth maybe 3 times or 4 times. I've been at least twice. Jill went once. I think Pastor Yeager went once. But this summer, assuming that it's allowed, pandemic wise, I'll schedule a wide open trip to the Creation Museum and Noah's Ark for anyone who wants to go. Seniors, adults, children, youth, families, anybody. And so it would be an overnight trip. We'd probably leave on a Friday morning, get back on Saturday evening. Spend a night in a just a regular old hotel kind of thing. It's in Cincinnati, so it's a 5-hour drive, but it's excellent. There's a lot of scientific evidence that they have on display that supports creation and gives you confidence that what you believe and what you've been taught by God himself from the Bible, it is true. And we're going to get a lot more into that evidence for creation next week in chapter 4. Okay, I'll have some more handouts for you. All right, last chance for any questions or comments. Lots of good stuff. Hopefully you've gained some confidence and knowledge that gives you the ability to respond. If somebody kind of asks you or confronts you about why do you believe creation or what do you believe about evolution, now you can maybe speak a little more intelligently about it. And even if that never happens, it at least gives you confidence in your own mind, confidence in the faith that God has given you in his truth, okay? All right, with that, let's rise and close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thanks for watching and being here. Have a good week.
Thank you.